Welcome to Commander Central, episode 290, and today we'll be talking about Gavin Verhey's Good Morning Magic episode and cards he regrets making. Then we'll try to fix some cards that we think are broken. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
Max and Chris, how you guys doing today?
It's cold out today.
I'm sleepy.
There is no doubt it is autumn.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I woke up this morning, I had run into work, I had like a little thing to deal with at about 5:30 a.m., and I walked up my back steps, and there was a giant raccoon sitting in my driveway staring at me that did not at all care about me. And I walked on the steps, and it just looked at me, and I walked over to the car, watching it, like, assuming it would at some point scamper away, and it just watched me. It went back down to eating whatever it was eating, and I got in the car, started up the engine, and it looked back up at me again, and went back down to what it was doing. Like, it was 6 feet away from me, and it just did not care at all about me being out there at 5:30 in the morning, disturbing it.
I feel like you've mentioned this on the show before. Doesn't your wife has been trying to train the squirrels in the neighborhood, right?
Yes. So
okay.
I think it was eating like peanut shells and stuff from the squirrels that they have semi-tamed.
Well, my roommate is also trying to tame the squirrels in our backyard, so maybe they need to get together and exchange tips.
Yeah, right. And I keep threatening I keep telling her too. I'm like, okay, now that we've got them all tamed, now we can harvest squirrels for squirrel meat all winter. She's like, no, don't you dare.
No, they will become your army. You've seen that Rick and Morty episode.
Yeah, good point. The squirrel army, that's perfect. I'm ready for that. And now that we've just got all those Modern Horizons 2 squirrel cards too, it's perfect.
Yep. You got to name one Chatterfang and one.
There we go, yeah. Any fun games get played this week by anybody? Max and I had some interesting games that got played this week.
Yeah, fun would not be the word I would use.
So the first one was rough because it was a Tiny Bones game. And in that one, I will blame myself and you somewhat, Max, because we didn't really have a good pregame conversation. You and I got there and we were just kind of BSing and not paying attention, and two other players came in and sat down and we just started playing. So we didn't properly talk much about what the game was going to look like. So that's kind of on us to a degree. And I did point out to the other player who was playing Tiny Bones that, hey, in the future, maybe just give everyone a heads up if you're playing a dedicated discard deck. Because it wasn't just like Tiny Bones. It was Tiny Bones running every possible hand hate card you could run. But I was very polite. I said, I suggested that you maybe give everyone a heads up next time. And the game was mostly fine. The problem with that kind of game is even when you kill the discard person, which is what happened, then everyone, the rest of the game is just a mess because then everyone was hellbent at that point. So it was that was a little bit of a frustrating experience, even though it was kind of our fault. That's unfortunate because then everyone else just sits there top decking. Whoever top decks the right card first wins, and that's basically what happened. I guess the justice in that game would have been the reason the Tiny Bones player wound up getting killed was because he had played Sheila Dread, and I had hit him for some amount of damage at some point earlier, taking him down to I think 8.
Yeah, 7 or 8. Yeah.
And the only creature I had out was Jury, who I had knocked up to 9 or 10 power, and it came back around to me. I literally had no choice but to sacrifice Jury to kill the Tiny Bones player. So he was the architect of his own demise there by forcing me to sacrifice my commander. And the next game that we had was a Volo game where the Volo player was taking really long turns.
And not accomplishing anything.
And not really getting there either, yeah. So that was a little bit frustrating as well. So we had a couple of frustrating games in one way or the other on Tuesday, but it is what it is. So did you play anything online this week or anything, Max?
Nope, not yet. I might try to get some games in this weekend to try to get some good tests in with my new deck. I tried playing that first game against the Tiny Bones deck, and that just wasn't working out in my favor. Yeah,
you don't want to spend your first game with your brand new deck being at 0 cards in hand. That's not the best way to get reps in for it. So, yeah, that one was rough. Anything exciting going on anywhere else out there in the world of Magic? We got some preview cards, I guess, we can talk about real quick here.
Yeah, we sure did.
It literally, we're recording this Thursday morning, and this popped up an hour ago.
About that, yeah.
So we got a preview from IGN of 2 of the cards from the Stranger Things Secret Lair. The Boros card is Chief Jim Hopper, 2 a red and a white For a human soldier, he's a 4/4 with menace. And whenever Chief Jim Hopper attacks, investigate once for each non-token attacking creature. And it has a mechanic called Friends Forever. And you can have 2 commanders if both have friends forever. So basically it's like a midpoint between the partner mechanic and the partner with mechanic. Partner with restricts you to one specific creature. Partner lets you, match it with anything else with partner. This is limiting you to partnering it with presumably one of you Stranger Things commanders.
Yeah, and we don't know exactly how many there's going to be, I'm assuming.
There's 8 cards in the set. Whether or not they're all going to be legends, I guess we don't know for sure. I could see them like throwing 1 or 2 equipment or something in there like they've done in the past with Lucille from Walking Dead, so who knows. And the other one is 11 the Mage, 1 blue, black, red for a human wizard. She's a 3/5. Your maximum hand size is 11. And whenever 11 the Mage attacks, you draw a card and lose a life. Then if you have 11 or more cards in your hand, you may cast an instant or sorcery card from your hand without paying its mana cost. And 11 also has Friends Forever. So first things first, what are you guys' thoughts on the Friends Forever variant of the partner mechanic? Do you like that or dislike it, or do you not care?
I think the Friends Forever mechanic is, I guess, cool in the sense that when you think about the show, all the kids and Hopper and the other kid's mom and like the teenagers, they're all been in this group battling the creatures from the Upside Down. So I get why you would want them together in the command zone.
Yeah.
What I'm intrigued with is how are they going to, because they did say that we'll get non-Secret Lair versions of these cards 6+ months down the road. How are they going to use this Friends Forever thing in a non-Secret Lair set? So that takes me to Battle Bond 2. Are we going away from Partners With to, Friends Forever or whatever they want to rename it to be the same mechanic but not Friends Forever for like a Battle Bond type set?
I can't remember where I saw this at, but I saw some suggestion this morning that like they could treat some mechanics have like Devour. There's Devour 3, Devour 1, Devour X, whatever, like different variants on Devour. Ward has that, Ward 4, Ward 1. So like depending on what the number is, that affects how much mana is required to use the ability. This is something they could technically do with Partner, where they could say partner with and have a name. I don't know what they would choose. Partner with Stranger Things or something. So it could partner with something from Stranger Things. They could also do that with, like, technically Boros, partner with Boros, or whatever name they want to give it, partner with Boros Legion. So, like, if there was 6 different cards with partner with Boros Legion, all, Boros ones, presumably, whatever name you gave it, they could then have partner with something else with that same name. So that's what I thought that was an interesting suggestion, and that wouldn't surprise me if Friends Forever was just a name for, in the future, if they want to cluster up things with partner, they could do the same thing. Give a partner with, then like some kind of a name for the whole like category of what those creatures will be.
Okay, I can see that. Yeah, because so Friends Forever is just going to limit it to, this special series type of thing.
Right.
But a new mechanic in, they're kind of playtesting it, see what happens.
And where I would bet we wind up seeing the regular versions of these is probably in, again, this is me just guessing, but Commander Legends 2 is going to come out in 2022. We don't know when, but it is coming out. I would bet, because, partners make for a really good mechanic for that set, for draft in particular, it wouldn't surprise me if then they had a couple of these like groups in Commander 2022 and, the Chief Jim Hopper card wound up being some other creature in that set, same with the 11 one, that also had then, that way they could have it only partner with whatever the groups are they're going to use for Commander Legends, and keeps it from being wide open, because every time they add a new partner commander, the amount of combinations goes up exponentially, and that makes it so much more difficult to play test. So yeah, I'm betting we're going to see more of that kind of thing. And then they will just treat the original partner as if it had its own partner group as well. Like, they can only partner with other things that are open-ended, and that just will quit printing those. So yeah, I think it kind of makes sense, and it lets them keep the pools kind of collapsed onto one another for future partner groupings. So
I do believe that you're probably correct as to seeing them in the next Commander Legends set, because the next one is Battle for Baldur's Gate, which is a D&D theme set.
Yeah.
And I know from my understanding of Stranger Things, something about they play D&D on the show or something, or they're all part of a D&D community. So that would probably be a good guess right there.
If you haven't watched it, Chris, it's pretty good. It's particularly the first season is very entertaining. It's worth giving a watch. And your kid's probably old enough now he could watch the first season as well.
Probably. We just watched Venom last night, and he said he loved that movie.
Did he?
So.
Cool. Once they get to about that 8 to 10 age, a lot of that stuff is a lot more fun to watch then.
Yes.
So yeah, I think these are both really interesting cards. I like Investigate as a mechanic. It's good to see that show up there. Commanders with it are super cool. And I think the 11 one is fun too. Having to have 11 cards in hand to get the ability is an interesting thing that forces you to jump through a few smaller hoops. I like that too.
11 cards. That's so many cards.
Yeah, it's a big hand, yeah. So if you out there in listener land want to reach out to us and share your thoughts on this new secret lair, or just anything in general, how would you go about doing that, Chris?
You can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central, and you can also find us online at cmdrcentral.com.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central and check out our reward tiers, such as the Decks You Play show, or joining our community to chat with us and play virtual EDH. This week we want to say hello and thank you to 3 new patrons, Andy Lancaster, Hydropod, and Ashley Morningstar.
Thanks to the 3 of you, and thanks to all our patron supporters, as well as all our listeners. All the support we get from all of you, whether it's on Patreon or whether it's just by listening to the show and clicking those like and upvote buttons, we really appreciate it. It means a lot and helps keep the show functioning, keeps the lights on, and keeps Max wearing pants. Kind of. Working from home, pants are entirely optional for you all the time now.
I had to put pants on. I have some appointments this afternoon, so...
All right.
I did see a commercial the other day, Max, that reminded me of you. Is something about, they were showing the guy like working from home, talking to people on his computer, and then he logs out and he gets up and stretches, and he's just wearing his underwear, but like a nice polo shirt on top. And I'm like, that's so Max.
I love those ones. There's also the one where it's the husband and wife getting ready for like the cocktail party, and he thinks it's over Zoom, and he walks out on the patio and all the neighbors are there, and he's just in his tighty whities and a dress shirt. He goes, "So this isn't virtual. Okay."
Well, we got up this morning because we had a parent-teacher conference scheduled. That's going on this weekend, or this week.
Sure is.
And literally we're going to go, and my wife's like, "Oh, I'm glad I checked. These are on Zoom, not in person." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, good thing we double-checked that." So, yes, our parent-teacher conference was online. We didn't have to go in for it, and we almost went in.
I'm going to have to double-check that now. Thanks for saying something, Dana, because I won't be able to make it, because I think Connor's is tonight, and I have to work. So I'll have to tell Cindy to look it up.
Yeah, verify, because, our definite high school one was for sure. Well, speaking of patron supporters, we actually have a giveaway going on this month. We have 6 different playmats we're going to give away to people who like and retweet the tweet we sent out, and we'll send out again this Monday. There's a copy of the GP Richmond Sun Cleanser playmat, Nahiri the Harbinger, a Noxious Gear Hulk, a Thorncaster Sliver, a Unstable Very Cryptic Command, and a Worthy Challenger Amonkhet playmat. So 6 different ones, all provided to us by listener and past guest Craig DeBevick. And we also have a copy of the Commander Collection Green we're going to give away to 1 patron supporter. So if you are supporting the show, by the end of October, you'll be entered in a chance to win that Commander Collection Green. So thank you very much, Craig. We appreciate your support and for giving us these cool things to give away. So yeah, just like and retweet or join the Patreon, and you'll be entered in a chance to win one of those playmats or that Commander Collection Green. All right, folks. Main show. Gavin Verhey did a little Good Morning Magic this week where he talked about his top 5 cards that he regretted making. And I would recommend going out there and listening to it. I think we'll try to put a link in the show notes here when we tweet out the show on Monday. It's worth checking out. It's like maybe 10 minutes long. And he just talks about some cards he put together over the years that he's designed that he wished he would have done differently. So, Max, you did the show notes for this. You want to go over the cards that Gavin was talking about?
Yeah, so I'll start at the bottom of the list and work my way up to number 1. His number 5 was Najeela the Blade Blossom from Battle Bond. He identified there are 2 big problems with the card. The first being Najeela's first ability triggers off of tokens. And she makes tokens, so it's just an endless cycle of making fodder to be able to tap or create mana to fuel the second ability, which is if you pay Wooburg, you untap all your dudes and attack again. He said the way to fix those problems would be to make the first clause say whenever a non-token warrior attacks, and that would probably fix it a lot. And then the second clause would be putting like a only activate once per turn clause into the ability.
Yeah, the worst part about Najeela is that she is a warrior herself, so she spits out a token, and then the next turn you attack with 2, which then spits out 2 tokens, and it's an horrible cycle.
I believe he made a point in the video saying, the idea was to make you want to run warriors in your deck where you really don't need to because she spits them out herself. So the fourth card on the list was Boreas Charger. This is the Pegasus that when it enters the battlefield, search your library for up to the number of planes equal to the difference between your land count and an opponent's, and then you may play a planes of the ones you grab onto the battlefield. He thinks that ability is too weak, and it was originally designed to say put all planes found this way onto the battlefield. Through testing, it got voted to be changed to put one. He thinks it should have stayed how it was and put all the planes you found, put them onto the battlefield, and this would have made it a good white staple for EDH.
Yeah, because the difference between land count probably wouldn't have been too bad when it comes out. I mean, maybe your guy's up 4 lands on you. I mean, that's not a huge deal overall.
Right.
Yeah, this is a good example of how, and we've complained about it on the show before too, about how they seem to be super conservative with giving white draw or ramp in a way they're not for other colors. And this is an example of that. Like they were just too cautious, and Gavin admits he was too cautious with this one. So yeah.
Number 3 was Thantis the War Weaver. This was one of the backup commanders from the King Winggrace deck from a few years ago. Everyone during playtesting loved this card. The big issue was that in the Jun's land deck, there was no backup commanders that actually dealt with lands outside of the vagueness of you need lands for Gyrus to reanimate stuff out of your graveyard. The lesson learned here was you shouldn't let your feelings for a card cloud how it is actually affecting the set it's being made for, and he wishes he could go back and make a Lands Matter commander and save Thantis for a different product line down the road.
Yeah, something that Thantis would have fit in a lot better and would have meshed with.
Yeah, this one's kind of more of a high level. It's more of a regretting how he built the deck than it was a particular card. Because yeah, Thantis is a super cool card, but I remember us commenting on that during the set that it's a kind of a Lands Matter landfall deck, and Windgrace was the only one of the commanders that cared about it, whereas particularly in the Bant deck, you had 3 commanders that all cared about enchantments.
Yep.
So that was very much the least thematic of all those decks that year in part to things like Thantis, which is a cool design, and so was Gyrus, but they absolutely just didn't match the deck.
Moving up to number 2 was Yuriko the Tiger's Shadow. This is the commander with Commander Ninjutsu, and that's the problem. Gavin said he chose to design Commander Ninjutsu where it doesn't use commander tax. And this essentially fundamentally breaks the rule of the format, and scaling the commander's cost helps make sure that the flow and trajectory of the game scales with what happens in the game so it becomes self-balancing. Well, if your Commander Ninjutsu always costs that 2, your commander is super powerful and you can just keep spending 2 mana. I'm sure this kind of goes along the same lines of Derevi if this would have been included in the video.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't catch that because, everyone despises Derevi already because of the ability to just cast her for 4 right out of the command zone no matter what. So having this where I think the ninjutsu is 3 on this, 2 or 3 or something.
I think it's 2. I think it's just Demir.
Ugh. Yeah, I know this card's extremely busted in like a 1v1 format, but in multiplayer I've actually noticed that this card isn't as powerful as you think it is because you can only really target one person and the rest of it doesn't really matter.
Right.
Yeah, I think it is a CEDH commander, but that's playing under different rules too. I think that the amount of gas it provides is a bigger deal than the ninjutsu stuff it's doing. Because yeah, in relatively casual, it's good, but it's very breakable. But it's not anything that necessarily warps the game around it. It's a solid commander. Yeah, that's one being able to skip that command tax and make it so you can't if it is a problem and people are just removing it constantly. At some point, things are supposed to get prohibitively expensive, and Yuriko just never does.
Yeah, that's true.
So, yeah, for sure.
And then finally at the number 1 spot was Edgar Markov. Gavin talked at length about the Eminence ability throughout that entire commander set and how most of them were cost reducing or, maybe power and toughness buffing, but the fact that Edgar Markov was a body-making machine that your opponents essentially can't deal with unless you cast it just got out of control. The original idea was to make this so the Mardu deck could rebuild faster after board wipes. It just got kind of he didn't see it becoming this powerful that fast. He said having an enchantment your other players can't interact with in the command zone is just too strong. He gave some examples of maybe we should have made this whenever a vampire you control deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it, similar to other Innistrad vampires, along with maybe just a static buff of all vampires you control have lifelink, whether Edgar's in the zone or on the field.
Okay, I could see that. I was thinking more of the long lines you could leave it as whenever a vampire enters, you can create one, but it comes into play tapped, or you lose 1 life when it comes into play or something like that. Something that you're getting a hefty downside to the card, but still have that, incremental advantage.
Chris, you said something interesting there. I think just changing it to maybe whenever a vampire enters the battle, a non-token vampire enters the battlefield, because right now Edgar says cast.
Yep. Yeah, something that forces it to enter. But then a downside of it entering, I like it where they come into play tapped or something, the tokens do, because then it still leaves you wide open for the other players to just keep ramming hate at you to, kill you off before you can get any sort of board state.
So this is one I can definitely speak to from personal experience, because I built this deck immediately. This was the first one I bought from that set, tore it open the day of release, and started making changes right away. And the first thing I did was pull out every vampire that cost 4 mana or more, and most of the ones that cost 3 or 2, and replace them with every terrible vampire I could find that cost 1 or 2 mana. And it had 25 of them in there, because the deck plays best if you're running terrible vampires. And I remember talking about this on the show. That was where I found the card. I think Dean Goody recommended it, but I've used it since then, which was Minions Murmurs, where you draw a card for each creature you control and lose a life. But in that Edgar deck, where turn 1, you drop a crappy 1-drop vampire and make a token. Turn 2, you drop 2 crappy 1-drop vampires and make 2 more tokens. Turn 3, drop something else. Turn 4, cast Minions Murmurs and draw 12 cards and lose 12 life. But who cares? You've got an entire board wide with vampires already, and then if you drop a shared animosity or anything along those lines, you just kill everybody in 2 or 3 more turns. It's a super strong ability on Edgar, and it made it so you didn't do fun vampire stuff. At least the best way to play it was to not run fun vampire stuff. You were discouraged from running really cool, neat vampires that you'd think you'd want in a vampire tribal deck, because the best way to play it was with, if there was a vanilla vampire that cost 1 mana to cast, that was almost always better than an actual good one that cost 5.
I agree with that.
It's an odd design that was too strong. It also just discouraged, it encouraged you to play in a way that didn't necessarily lead to interesting gameplay, I think. So
I think it also punishes new players too, because they see that and they think it's all awesome. And I don't know how many games I've played against an Edgar deck where they're like this and this and this and this, and they have 1 card in hand, and I'm just like, Wrath of God, and they're like, and it's like, yeah. And then you just, they're locked out of the game for a good chunk of time.
Or they're playing against you, and you pop off, and they're like, oh, I can't stop this because your commander's in the command zone, and it's just always going to do stuff, too. So it's also frustrating to play against, particularly for new players who don't understand, who don't want to deal with the fact that, I can't interact with the thing you're doing.
And that's why Elish Norn is awesome. Because you know what? All you little vampires, you just die.
Elish Norn is always awesome. So, and then interestingly enough, actually, in the games Max and I played on Tuesday that we talked about earlier, Ristic Study came up.
Interesting.
And one of the things that we at the table were kind of talking about, because what happened was someone had played Ristic Study, and, the usual, hey, did you pay the 1? Did you pay the 1? And when it came back around to the Ristic Study player's turn, he cast some spell, and I was like, did you pay the 1 in Ristic Study? And he actually took it, he was confused. I'm like, no, I'm joking.
Why would you do that? That's so mean.
Yeah. But then we were kind of talking about, that would kind of fix Ristic Study. If it taxed you as well as everybody else, and then if you didn't pay, everybody else drew a card.
Yeah, I could see that.
So that kind of leads right into what we want to talk about, is because Gavin talked about some changes he would make to some cards that he didn't love the way they got designed. And I'm like, that would be the first one I would mention. Ristic Study is very efficient, comes down at 2 and a blue. It taxes everybody. And okay, so you don't draw any cards. Let's say everyone pays their tax every time. That's still a win. You're still forcing everyone to pay an extra mana, which limits the amount of spells they can play in their turn. Maybe they're going from casting 2 to casting 1, or they have to then choose, well, now I can't keep mana up for removal, or I can't keep mana up for a counter spell. Even if you draw 0 cards off Ristic Study over the course of a trip around the table, it still does really good work. So it's just a win-win card for the most part. And realistically, if you are playing blue, your deck's better off with the Ristic Study in it 99% of the time, too. There's just no decision to be made there. It's such a good card that if you can run it and you don't mind spending the money, because it's not cheap, you run it. It's just a great card. I don't run it in every blue deck, but my decks would probably objectively all be better if I did. So I do like that. I think that's one way that you could tweak Ristic Study and have it still be playable. I'd still run it if it taxed me as well. I mean, I'm still coming out on the upside of that. But I think that's a perfectly fair trade-off there, where if you don't pay your tax on the spells on your turn, then everyone else draws a card. I think that would balance it.
I think going The Mystic Remora route would be well with it too. Instead of just any spell, just instant or sorceries, would probably be a good route to take it as well.
That's a good point too. Way back when they introduced that cumulative upkeep mechanic in Ice Age, they threw it on everything. There's
yes, they did.
There's a gazillion cards in Ice Age with cumulative upkeep, most of which shouldn't have it, but Mystic Remora should. It makes perfect sense in that card, and actually, it's still really good, but it also keeps it somewhat in check. The fact that it's just going to go away for the most part, particularly if you cast it too early. If you cast it on turn 1 or turn 2, you're still going to get pretty good value off it, but it is going to go away. It's got a lifespan on it. And the same is true of Glacial Chasm to a degree. It's a really good card, but that's going to go away as well. So I think those are two good examples of, I don't love cumulative upkeep in general, but I think it actually makes both those cards pretty fair.
Oh, agreed.
So Max, we will start with you here. What's a card that you think that you have some ideas about how to tweak the problems with it?
I'm going to start off with our good old friend Cyclonic Rift.
All right.
Specifically the overload cost, because that's really what we talk about here in EDH. Currently, the overload cost is, 6 and a blue?
Yep.
That makes it really easy to slot into any deck that runs blue, when you only have to worry about 1 pip. So then, how do we fix that? In my opinion, we have to add more blue pips to that overload cost. When I was working through these notes, originally I was like, well, let's just make it 5 blue, but when I started looking at some of the decks I've built and decks I've built in the past, 2 blue pips is still pretty easy to justify a spell that powerful as Cyclonic Rift to put into your deck. Whether you're running primarily blue or very little blue in that 2-color deck, you can still make room for 2 blue pips. You got your Arcane Signets, your lands, your Signets, everything that can make blue mana for you. So then I started thinking about other blue instants that I tend not to run, and I instantly went to Cryptic Command with the triple blue.
Yep.
So that's kind of where I landed. If you change the overload cost to 4 generic and 3 blue, I think that would make it a lot harder for people to justify shoving in that 5-color deck where it's probably one of 3 blue cards, or in most 2-color decks where blue isn't the primary color, or even 3-color decks. I think it would help kind of diversify the format a little without people relying on running Cyclonic Rift.
I can get behind that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, and this is true of a lot of these cards, I think, where a restriction, particularly back in the day, a restriction that they thought was perfectly reasonable for Standard doesn't apply to Commander. I would guess when they designed Cyclonic Rift, so, that came out in Return to Ravnica, but that was probably designed 2 years earlier or so when Scars of Mirrodin Block was out. They just weren't thinking about Commander at all. That just never occurred to them when they were designing cards. So 7 mana in Standard is a pretty good amount of mana to spend. That probably keeps that overload balanced. It is not in Commander. So that's just an accident of, back in the day, them not thinking about Commander. The restriction that they thought was enough of a restriction, 7 mana just isn't a thing. So I agree, the way you tweak that and the way you fix that is with the blue pips for sure. And I will fold in the one I was going to mention next into the same conversation because it's the same thing. Smothering Tithe currently costs 3 and a white, and you get to make a treasure whenever an opponent draws a card, unless they pay their tax. It has the same problem as Cyclonic Rift. Cyclonic Rift is super strong, don't get me wrong. Smothering Tithe is super strong as well. But I would argue the problem with both of those cards isn't their power, it's the fact that they go in every single deck because of the single blue and the single white. If you have access to blue legally, Cyclonic Rift is worth running in your deck every time, because it only costs 1 blue to cast to blow out everyone's board state. If you have access to white, Smothering Tithe is worth running in almost every white deck, I would dare say. So I 100% agree with you, Max. The problem with the Rift, as far as I'm concerned, isn't the power level, because you need powerful cards. It's the fact that it's a power level that goes in every single blue deck. Smothering Tithe is a super strong card, and there should be strong cards. The problem I have with Smothering Tithe isn't the strength, it's that it gets splashed into every single white deck.
So what do you think about for Cyclonic Rift if it were more of a Return to Dust aspect, where if you cast it during your turn, you can return all non-land permanents your controller, your opponent's control. But if you do it at instant speed, it's only 1 player.
Maybe that would be enough. I still think the problem you have there is I would probably still run it in every blue deck, or be tempted to, because that's just such a blowout. Even if it's on your turn, it's just such a blowout.
It prevents the end step, cast it, untap, have everything ready to go for the next turn where everyone else has nothing.
Yeah. I mean, it's still great, but maybe that would be enough.
I think if you were to word it like that, I think the overload cost. So are you saying you'd get rid of the overload cost completely, or would it still be there? So you can either single target something or do the mass bounce of everything.
I would leave it as is, but just change it where if you want to do a mass, then you have to do it on your turn. If you want to do it at instant speed, it would have to be just one player.
Gotcha. I think at that point then, knowing you're already confining it to if you want the bigger effect on your turn, I think you could probably drop the mana cost of the overload ability, since it's only hitting one player, and you have to do it on your turn.
Okay, I could see that.
And Max, you mentioned Cryptic Command. I had a exact similar thought with Smothering Tide. I was thinking about not Cryptic Command, but I was thinking of True Conviction. I would run True Conviction, which gives all your creatures double strike and lifelink. I would run True Conviction in every single deck that had white if it didn't cost triple white. Because there's a triple white in the mana cost, I don't. So I do really think the amount of colored pips in a card does almost enough for a lot of these things to control the power. Similarly, like you have Gratuitous Violence in red. Doubling the damage you deal for your red sources is amazing, but it's triple red, and you just can't run it in every single red deck, or you will have too many situations where you can't cast it. We just got Unnatural Growth in the Midnight Hunt, which is an enchantment that your creatures double their power and toughness every combat step until end of turn. That card is amazing. It's also 4 green, so like you're almost exclusively limited to mono green decks. Maybe if you're feeling bold and have a good mana base, you can run it in a 2-color deck, but that's it. Like you're not splashing Unnatural Growth into your 5-color dragon deck. As good as it is, you're probably just not going to be doing that. So I think I totally agree, Max. The pip thing is a big deal, and I think it would serve to put a lot of these cards in check for sure. At least for me, like I said, it's not the power; it's the fact that they just go everywhere. I'm fine with really powerful cards. I just don't want to see them in every single deck. So,
Chris, I want to see these in every single deck. Because I'm gonna play Blood Moon in all mine and be like, all those duels you guys are playing are just done.
So, Chris, what's yours you wanted to talk about here?
All right, so the first one I want to talk about, it's a very, very common card. Everyone plays it. It's green and it has a little symbol on it that looks like a forest, and I think that card should be gone from the Magic forever.
Change forest, make it cost a mana to play forest.
No. So the first one I want to talk about is Dockside Extortionist. I know this is one that everyone's been talking about, could be on the ban list, coming up here soon. Everyone probably wants it gone and everything. And I think the card just needed to be fixed overall. One of the big things that I noticed about this card is that they changed up how red actually plays the game. Like, red never cared about enchantments before. And now this card cares about enchantments. Like, it was weird that this one card out of, so many of them is like, oh, and enchantments, we're going to give you treasures instead of just artifacts. That would be one way I probably would have fixed it. Just said, artifacts in general, and that's the only way that you get other artifacts. Another good way.
Chris, I'll say this. I totally agree every time. That's the first thing I've thought of, so I'm glad we're on the same page. Whenever I've seen someone cast a Dockside, I've always been like, why does that also hit enchantments? It would still be super strong if it just cared about artifacts. The fact that it also cares about enchantments is not only weird, pushes it over the top. I'm 100% with you there.
Yeah, that caught me off guard when I saw that the first time. I was just like, okay, whatever, it is what it is. I understand the theory behind it, because it's all about shinies, and enchantments are nice, cool things too, but it is what it is. Another way I would probably do some things with this is I would change it from a 1-2. Like, I don't understand why it's a 1-2 to begin with. It should be a 1-1 so it can just get wiped out with any little ping or little -1/-1 to the board, anything like that, just to kill it off. Whereas, you can just be like, oh, I'm going to ping once every turn, wipe out tokens, but yet my 1-2 survives that I can start blinking and doing other stuff with.
The blink thing, I think, also is a good point. You could also very easily just have it say, when you cast Dockside Extortionist.
Yes, that would be wonderful.
Then you solve the blink problem where people start to run things just to blink it. It also makes it so you can't just start cloning it and copying it as well.
Well, and, not Paradox Engine, but that other artifact that doubles things, the triggers when the ETBs.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff like that. It would prevent, shenanigans of that sort. The last thing, is just mana cost overall. Like, it is 1 colorless and 1 red. So, why not up it to either 3 CMC? or even 4, or just make it a double red casting cost so you're stuck into the red aspect of it.
Whereas, double red would slow it up a little bit as well. You could still run it in every deck. I think double red wouldn't stop you from running it in a lot of places, but it would definitely slow you up, or at least make you be a little bit more cautious about when you cast it.
Yeah, because I've seen this in a lot of like even 3-color decks, where red's like the littlest of all the colors, and they, at 1 in a red, you can just jam it in and do whatever with it.
Yep.
No, for sure. Like this card out of all of them, that I've ever seen, I think is probably one of the most problematic cards in the format, just because of how powerful it is for, how little of a CMC it is, how little of a creature it is. And it's a goblin. That's like the worst part, is it's a goblin.
Yeah, for sure. The goblin thing doesn't help because it gives you extra synergy that you oftentimes don't get with these kind of creatures. I tend to agree with you, Chris. This is probably currently the biggest problem in the format. And I think there's a few reasons for that. I think one, like there are some cards that are crazy strong, but people just don't do it. I think that's maybe what keeps Thassa's Oracle in check. To really use it, you have to be using a combo with it, using something like, Tainted Pact or something. And I think
the deck has to be built around it.
Yeah. And I think the average casual player in a lower power level meta just isn't doing that. Whereas I think Dockside just being like a one and done creature makes it a lot easier for you to be like, oh, this is just one card making me treasures. I can run it. So I think Dockside shows up in a lot of places that Thassa's Oracle maybe doesn't because of that. And then it also encourages you to change your deck around it. It's encouraging you to say, well, I've already got Dockside in now. Why don't I run Splinter Twin? It's a good card anyway, and I can then put it on Dockside once in a while. Like it, because that was the problem way back in the day with Primetime and Sylvan Primordial when they got banned, is they were seeing people actually running like clone effects and things like that so they could start copying Primetime or Sylvan Primordial. And the RC really did not like the fact that not only were those powerful cards, they were so powerful people were changing their decks just to abuse them further.
Yes.
And I'm seeing some of that with Dockside. So
yeah, we don't talk about how I have a Dockside in my Alesha deck so I can just reanimate them repeatedly. I mean, we don't talk about that.
I'm just upset you guys are more angry that it's a goblin and not a pirate. Like, I have more qualms with it being a pirate than a goblin.
Yarr. All right,
well,
Max,
no, the pirate aspect makes sense, because it's all about,
Yeah.
Making treasure and stuff, so.
So, Max, what's your next one here?
My next one is the Great Henge. This came from Throne of Eldraine. It's 7 green for a legendary artifact. It has a lot of words on it. The first block of them being, this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. You can tap it for 2 green mana, and you gain 2 life. And whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and draw a card. I think, Dana, you were saying earlier that back when they were designing Rift, they weren't thinking about EDH. I don't think that's the case here with the Great Henge. EDH was a thing. Brawl was a thing. So in the thinking of EDH, not standard, I think this is how I would probably change it just to make it less powerful. Because this is straight up powerful. It's not, adding more pips doesn't make it worse. I would remove the cost reduction clause on it. Because in EDH, 7 power is pretty easy to do in mono green. I mean, that's like turn 4. And I also think you don't need to be gaining 2 life every time you tap it for 2 green mana. I think you either need to cut the mana down to 1 green and you keep the life clause, or just get rid of the gain life clause. I do, however, have no issues with the final clause of a non-token creature getting the counter and drawing a card, just because it makes people want to run spells that don't make tokens. So, like, that you're benefiting from that. I just think the other 2 clauses are way too much for this card.
Okay, I could get behind that. I'm fine with the, the cost reduction. I think if they put in more green pips on it, plus the cost reduction, like even if it's 3 green pips, then guaranteed it has to be 3 to come out. Or they make it, more balanced where it's like, we'll say 4 colorless and 3 green pips or something like that, or 4 green pips or something, but it costs green pips less. So then you still have to pay, X amount of whatever to play it. Whereas that's kind of broken too, because you could jam it in more decks, but I like it like that too.
Yeah, I agree. I think any of those changes that both you suggested would probably keep it in check. I also don't agree with the Great Henge. I don't think it's broken. It's just too much. It's just dumb. Like, it just shouldn't do all those things for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's better than Shoe Lane. I mean, at least it's not a cast trigger. I mean, it's an ETB trigger to get the draw and put a counter on stuff.
Well, the next one I have, I'm going to mention one card, but what I'm going to say probably applies to most of the cycle. And that was the cycle of free spells we got if you control your commander back in, I think it was 2020 or 2019.
The Ikoria set, yeah.
So Fierce Guardianship will be the prime example. 2 and a blue. If you control your commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost, and then you counter target non-creature spell. Super, super strong. I don't mind free counter spells. I think it's good to have them sometimes, particularly if you're maybe playing in a combo environment where you just sometimes just need to be ready at all times to stop someone from doing a thing. I think that the problem with it, weirdly enough, is the mana cost that you're going to be skipping sometimes. And here's why I'll say that. I've had to hard cast a Force of Will before because I didn't have a card to pitch in hand. And it feels terrible. You just are like, man, I wish I would have planned for that better because I needed to stop that thing. And instead I had to hard cast this Force of Will, and that's awful. I've also had to hard cast a Fierce Guardianship, and it doesn't feel bad at all. 3 mana to counter a target non-creature spell isn't great. Negate only costs 1 in a blue, but it's only 1 more. Paying 1 more mana for a negate in a worst case scenario is still pretty okay versus paying 5 mana on that Force of Will where you're like, I need to work harder and not have got myself in that position. And I think if you got punished more for not having your commander out, Fierce Guardianship and all of those spells in that cycle would be way more fair, I think. So I would add at least 1 more mana, if not 2 more mana to most of those mana costs. So at least it punished you if you weren't being cautious with having your commander out.
I'm not too worried about the mana cost per se. I would like it to read more of a Force of Will, Force of Negation clause, where if you're casting it without paying its mana cost, you exile the card.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'd be fair with that too.
Something like that. So it's actually gone forever type of thing. But then if you cast it for normal mana, it does just go into the graveyard. Something along those lines. So it sticks within the same boundary of what those cards were doing as well.
Yeah, I really like that idea, Chris. And Dana, I have a question. Did you not have a card to pitch, or were you just at 1 life for that Force of Will?
I didn't have a card to pitch, is why. And actually, here's what it was. Here's the exact situation the last time I did it, which was in Vegas in 2019. I needed to make a blocker to keep from getting killed. So the only I had 1 more blue card in hand, which was a Swan Song. I needed to cast a Force of Will. I needed to cast something first, counterspell my thing with
Force.
With a 4, I can't remember what the exact sequence was, but I had to counter my own thing so I could get the token off a Swan Song to make a blocker.
I remember that game. You were playing against Don.
Against Don Might of Media Track. I don't remember what the exact sequence was, but I couldn't pitch the thing because I needed to have a Swan Song available to counter the Force of Will so I could make a bird to block and survive for 1 more turn.
Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah. You gotta do whatever you can to like that old story about the guy hanging from the cliff on holding onto the little blade of grass. Like it's not gonna work, but you gotta try.
Exactly.
All right, Chris, what's your last one here?
My last one is one that I think, I don't want to say it's broken per se, but I think it's probably one of the most unbalanced cards in the game, and that's Teferi's Protection. For 3 mana, you get to just pretend that you're one of the penguins from the movie Madagascar, and you just sit there and smile and wave.
Pretend you're John Cena, nobody can see you.
Yes, I mean, that's pretty much what it is. And I thought really long and hard on this card, trying to figure out how to make it more balanced. And you could either change it with, color pips or higher CMC, all that fun jazz. It's one of the best ways to do it. But I think one of the ways that would probably make it more fair is if there was a downside to the card. Some sort of hefty downside to it to just do whatever you want. Whether it's, you don't get to draw during your next turn, or I don't know, all your creatures remain tapped when they come into play, or they return into the battlefield tapped or something like that, Some sort of shenanigans around that route that could do something that prevents you from getting so much incremental advantage from just saving yourself. Like, I have no problem with cards to save yourself, the Boros Charm, Heroic Interventions, all that stuff, but this is just a straight up, nothing can happen to me type of thing. And that was one of the things that caught me off guard with this card. The other thing with this is, they changed the rules on tokens and phasing.
Yes.
So, I mean, this and that, it's just, that was just disgusting right there, So enough said on that part. The one other thing I was contemplating with this card is maybe it could have had the clause that the Dominaria legendary sorceries and enchantment or instance had, where you had to have a legendary creature in play to cast it. And I think that would probably be the best way to balance this card. Sure. So you're forced to have your commander or some sort of other legend in there, so people could be paying attention, if they are, and just be like, so if I remove this, we're going to see if he has it, because if he doesn't have it, he won't cast it. If he has it, maybe he'll protect himself, which then prevented me from doing a full-out attack on him, and I can focus my resources on other people in the game.
Oh, I really wish they would, print legendary sorceries more often. I absolutely like that restriction. I think it's not backbreaking, but it forces you to do a little bit of planning and work around what has to be in play when you cast a spell. For sure, that would have been a great one to do legendary. Yeah, I'm definitely on board with that.
I mean, just this card. I mean, it's like, I don't know. It's like one of a kind that does what it does, and it's weird that that they printed something like this. Honestly, it caught me off guard when I first saw it.
I will note this, and I'm not sure if it's because Max has multiple white decks or what, but like, I don't know the last time I've played a game. I guess this Tuesday didn't happen, but prior to that, every time I play against Max, one of us cast Teferi's Protection. Like, consistently, I've seen more Teferi's Protections playing against and with Max than I have anybody else. We just both play that card everywhere, and it seems to pop up.
I have them in decks, and I just never see the card. I don't think it exists. It's like my Soul Ring. It doesn't exist.
I think one thing that would be nice is if it had split second just for me.
Oh, God.
What? I'm not sure that solves any problems.
Only when I cast it has split second.
It is definitely one of those cards I think is very unbalanced, and it's in white, so that's why I don't like picking on it, because, white needs all the help they can get. But at the same time, it's so splashable in other colors.
Yes. Really, it seems like a lot of this stuff feels like a big part of the problem is how easy it is to splash it, for sure.
Yes.
Well, I think that is going to wrap up the cards that we would change. Of course, there's a gazillion more. We've talked about a bunch of commanders. I mean, you could talk about Soul Ring. Like, you'd be like, well, how would you change Soul Ring? I'd make it into Worn Power Stone. I don't know.
I would change all the swords of X and Y to be legendary, so Dana can't make 800 of them in his Azorius deck.
They should be legendary. Probably
they should be legendary. Yes, because they're like even named. So like the Sword of Feast and Famine, it should be a legendary sword.
Exactly.
And then Dana makes 18 copies of one, and we all die.
I do want to say, not that Gavin's listening probably, but like, I number one have a lot of respect for Gavin just in general. He's a pretty smart guy that designs a lot of cool cards, but I have a lot of respect for him going back through and just being like, yup, this is where I screwed up. Like, that's, I think, a lot, that's a difficult thing to do, particularly someone in his position, and the fact that he like literally recorded a video about the mistakes he's made, I think is super cool, and I really respect that kind of thing. So if you haven't seen it, go check out that video.
I don't necessarily think it's mistakes, though. Yeah. I think it's just more of lessons, because like it was like something new, it's a growing format. So you make something and then it's like, ooh, yeah, we probably stepped, across that line a little bit with this one. So we need to scale it back for the next type of thing like that.
Right. He didn't just say like, I made a mistake here. He said, I made a mistake. Here's why I made it. And here's what I would do differently. And here's what I've learned from that.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good thing to do as a designer. And I like that that not only does he do it, he's willing to like admit he does it. So that's worth mentioning. That I think that's super cool on his part. All right, that is going to wrap up episode 290 of Commander Central. I am Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him on Twitter at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We will be back next week. Until then, I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.